very warm welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have joined us. An equally warm welcome to our viewers around the world, those of you who continue to follow us weekly via the World Wide Web. Now, after last week's presentation where Mrs. Norma Odle regaled us with memories of her childhood, we received several telephone calls and email messages asking if she could continue her presentation this week. Well, the good news is the 96-year-old lady consented. Yes, she has agreed to continue sharing. Therefore, we will think of this as part 2 of Norma Odle's 96th birthday gift to the people of Barbados. This time around, she begins by sharing of her genealogy, her father, and his ancestry.
My dad was the headmaster, and he had no bicycle, he had no car. He had 8 children to bring up, and he had his wife, and his mother, and a sister. Because my dad lost his father at a very young age. He was only 14 when his father died. See, so he had to carry mother, because in those days women did not go outside to work. They had to work in the household. My dad's ancestors came from Ireland, and the land in St. Philip. They came from the land in St. Philip. I don't know exactly what they did, but coming down, I am inclined to think that it came down to boat builders, because my father's grandfather was a boat builder. Okay, when he left St. Philip, his father was a white man that got married to a black woman, and they had 6 daughters and 2 sons. Well, my father has come down from that son. That son came down to Bridgetown and got married and lived in Bridgetown. But he was a boat builder, because I heard my dad say he used to go to Whole Town. They had the boat building in Whole Town. So he would get a boat and sail down to Whole Town on the Monday morning, and they wouldn't come back up until the Friday. So they were working building boats. They called them shipwrights, I think. Yes. That's what they called them. That was his trade. And somewhere in the talk to the thing, one of the public building, there's a clerk that helped build the public building, and it was from that same clerk ancestral. Yeah. So there were more builders. But that's what his ancestors came from Ireland, you know. But after he got married to my father's grandfather got married. His father got married to a black one. He brought the family. The family broke with him. So he was on his own, and he came from a place called Clark's Hill in St. Philip's. Clark's Hill's house is still there, but it is said that those ancestral people that they gave land to the parish to build St. Catherine's Church was given by the Clarks to build St. Catherine's Church, his ancestors. Yeah. But we didn't know much about it. But coming down to my father's grandfather, he only had one brother. That brother went overseas, and a sister went overseas. But the other sisters then were married, so their names were changed. My father, I tell you, he didn't have a degree. But when my dad left elementary school, he became a pupil teacher. They had a Bay Street Boys School, there were 2 smaller schools amalgamated to make Bay Street. And Daddy was a pupil teacher there. But he took lessons to promote his self to become, to the point he did. They had something called the Royal Institute. Training Institute. Yeah, and all those things. The people who did not get a second education went to these places and educated themselves. And my father was one of those. He came out of that. So when St. Mary's became vacant, he got that school, you see. So he didn't have a degree, but he had his education from these places.
There's a lot that we could learn from the fine example of her father. He believed in continued education and the need to keep pace with his profession. He was indeed a self-motivated individual.
So my dad had to walk all the way down to St. Mary's Boys' School. And he got that school at 27 years old. And he worked there most of his life. And he last, I think about 4 or 5 years, between 3 and 5 years, he was transferred from St. Mary's to St. Leonard's Boys. Because they had another gentleman there called Mr. Clark too, who lived in Bank Hall. Mr. Clark was the head teacher there, and he had retired. So my father got that school. It was a bigger school. You get a little more money. You got to the country. People had, the boys, how many children they had in the school. Her daddy got St. Leonard's. And then he taught there for a few years. And then he really brought up that school to start to, you know, it was a real good big school. And then the government, at that time, things had changed up with government and so on then. And they wanted to make St. Leonard's a secondary school. But they didn't want my father to be there. They wanted somebody with a degree. So my dad had no degree. He had all the experience you can imagine, but he had no degree. So they were going to put Dayton Griffith. Dayton Griffith had a degree, so they gave him that school. So they're going to turn St. Leonard's into a second grade school, where the boys can go on to what they call them now O levels.
Yeah, CXC, O levels.
CXC, yes. In my day, they called it Oxford and Cambridge. Oxford and Cambridge, because we sat the exams. Those papers came from England. You know, we were a colony. Those papers came from England, and they were sent back to England to be corrected. You know, and in those days, you had to pass, to get a certificate, you had to pass a certain amount, all the subjects to get that certificate. You had to pass English, you know. Anyway, getting back to my father. Charlie Broom, his good friend, they used to call my daddy Ted, because they call him Ted. He said, Ted, man, I got to retire, because Charlie was very annoyed that my daddy did not keep on in school he was at. They took it from him. So Charlie Broom told Daddy, Ted, man, I'm going to retire. And he retired, and they gave my father Wesley Hall. So he taught at Wesley Hall for a couple of years, not too many years. And then he also retired at 60 years old. After he retired at 60 from the elementary school, he was offered a position at Harrison College for the boys, and they call it a prep school, then they have prep and then first one. But it's the younger boys that teach English and so forth, and geography and that kind of stuff. But my father's hair was white, silvery white. So all the school boys nicknamed him Snow Tops. His white hair was so, we'd call him Snow Tops. All those boys gave him that nickname, yeah. I remember, as I said, Daddy was a headmaster all those years, and he had a lot of country headmasters he knew. He had Brian Waith, who was in St. Peter. He had C.P. Smith's father. He had Mr. Barker, Macy Barker's father. And all those fellows were headmasters in country. And all those country headmasters had the privilege of a house to school. And they always had a little piece of land attached, and it grew kitchen gardens. And then any of those guys coming down to Bridgetown, my father said always had Bridgetown, so when he coming down, they would always bring some of their vegetables or whatever from my parents. Well, we didn't have anything to give back like vegetables, but if in the household they had like little girls and so on, my mother would make a couple of little dresses, 2 or 3 dresses for their little. When she make ours, she'd make for those children and give the parents in exchange. That's how people lived. If you had a lick, didn't have to buy a bright fruit or a pear or nothing like that. Because if you had a tree, you could send something to your neighbours. You always took care of your neighbours.
The importance of sharing and looking out for the interests of your neighbours. Yes, it makes for a better Barbados. Now on to her mother and the fundamental role she played in the family.
But my mother now was also a teacher. Her mother died when she was 16, and the following year her father got married again and went off with his new wife, and then she was raised with her grandmother. But she became a teacher too, at Grace Hill. Remember, where she lived was in a place called School Lane, Halls Road. I don't know if you know that place. There's, off of Halls Road, there are many lanes, and School Lane, and why they call it School Lane, because my mother told me there was a school in that lane, and that's why they call it School Lane. She went to school there, and my father's people also lived on School Lane. So my father and mother knew each other when they were kids. They went to school, to that school on School Lane, you see? So, backtracking, what I was telling you. Oh, so my mother too, when she became, from the elementary school, she became a pupil teacher in that same school. A pupil teacher is a teacher who is taken go to the highest level of the school. And after that, if you can afford to go to secondary school, the head teacher takes them and put them to teach the junior school. So they become pupil teachers, you see? And then they elevate themselves up. My mother then got from that school and she went to Grace Hill. Grace Hill is a school up there by where Price Mark is now, up in that area. I think that school is that school still there?
No, it doesn't exist anymore.
But Grace Hill, but I think they call it something else now. There's a school up there.
Part of Eden Lodge now?
Huh?
I think that
Where Price Mark is, somewhere up there.
Eden Lodge.
Eden Lodge School?
Yeah.
But my mother had to walk from Halls Road every morning to where Price Mark is now, and walk back on the afternoons. Can you imagine that? They didn't have any buses or cars and so on. They had a thing called a tram car. My mother said they had a tram car. This thing was drawn by horses, and it went as far as Eagle Hall. But she walked, and she said when she would walk through Bank Hall to go to school, and all Bank Hall had canes. The houses, there were canes and so on, and when she she would run and run to get to school on time. But those were the days. Those were the days. My mother, when they got married, Daddy and Mother got married, they were 25. As I said, they were friends from the children. They got married at 25 years old, and she had to give up her job as a teacher because they were not allowed, married women were not allowed to teach. That is true, you know. Even since, women have come a long way, because let me tell you something. When I was a young girl, I think I was already married, because I got married at 25 too, and I was working at the Advocate. I applied to Barclays Bank for a job. I was married, so they didn't take me on at Barclays Bank. You see? But then my sister came after me and she worked at Barclays Bank. She was single. She was a princess until she died. That's how, so I'm just showing you how far women have come. Nevertheless, my mother, get back to my mother, she had to give her a job. So she was home, and she was an exceptional mother and a housewife. Because, as I said, Daddy was the only working person in the house, and they had children and a sister and a mother. And Daddy, my mother, worked in the home. She made every piece of clothes that her family wore, boys and the girls. She made all the clothes. And even from the underwear come back up, pajamas, underwear, everything, you know?
And hats.
Hats, everything. And then she did a lot in the household to cut and contrive, to run the dollar, make the dollar work. I never knew of a hungry day. We never knew of a hungry. My mother made the money stretch and did things to make me food stretch, you know? And she would make a little clothes for people outside that a little money would come in from her industry too, you know? So That's how it was. She was a very, and she lived till she was 90 years old.
What animals she had?
Still trying to make her own clothes at that age.
Did you have animals?
Oh, that is something else. During the war days, we had plenty of animals because we always had a big backyard. And we had 2 goats giving milk and a ram giving service. So my mother, she would milk her own goats. She had a nice pen erected in the backyard and always kept clean and good. She was a very early riser, and she would go and she would have her towels and her soap on her bucket with water, and she'd go and wash the goats down in the morning, the udders and so on, sit down on a little bench, and she would get the goat's milk to put in the house. Then she had chicken runs of chickens, ducks, turkeys. Think of everything you can in that backyard, in a little shed, and then every morning you let them out, because in that shed had poles across. Chickens always like to sleep elevated on these poles, so they would go to sleep at night on these poles. But in the morning you opened the door and everybody came in the yard, and you threw down the corn and the oats on the ground, and they picked it and so on and so on. So we ate from our backyard: chickens, turkeys, goat's milk, rabbits. One of my brothers, he was very industrious with his rabbits. He made his pens. That was Eric too. Yes. Eric and Keith, my 2 older brothers, and they made the pens and for the different rabbits, you know. And in those days they had sweet potatoes was very prevalent. It was make a good meal, you know. And you would have the horse, not the horse, the donkey carts driven by donkeys, where these men would go to the fields and buy potatoes. They would have the carts full of potatoes, and the potatoes would be covered with the slips. You know what are the slips? Yes. Slips would be covered with potatoes to keep them cool. And they would know their customers as they come down the street, and they would always stop at Mrs. Clark, and she would buy some slips for the goats, you know, and potatoes for the household, you know. So I was telling you about the war, that was the war days. Yes. So when we moved from there to Barbary Hill, we had a bigger backyard, and we could supply the house with everything. They had a piece of land right next door to the house, and my mother, she planted it up with the beets and carrots and pepper trees and everything she could think of, and we got something from that to help the household too, along with the chickens and the ducks and the turkeys and the goats, you know. Funny enough, you're talking about the war days now. In those war days, boats were not coming to the island, they couldn't come. So they didn't get the provisions as they would like. But my mother would take the carrot tops when she cut off the carrots from the leaves, and she would put those carrot leaves in a tray and put in the sun to dry and package them. And she made tea from those carrot tea every morning. Instead of the regular tea packages of tea that would come, those packages, she made tea from the carrots, which did a lot for your system. Because I know one of my brothers, he had a little crooked eye. They said carrots are very good for your eyes, you know. Crooked eye, and he's drinking that carrot tea, his eyes turned up, you know. So what I'm trying to say is that my mother was an industrious woman and did everything in the household to keep the house going. We didn't go to the doctors. Oh, you had to pay money to get to a doctor. My mother had a medical book. And she had a medical book, and she had another little book called Humphrey's Homeopathic Medicine, a little red book. And they gave it numbers for each little bottle, what each number would do for you. And she had a medical book, and she would always refer to her medical book for what. But we always had a little garden with things in it, and different bushes for different cures. And then they had some ladies from the country who would come down. They would know what bush was good for what, and they would come down with the bush wrapped in nicely out of trays, and they were stopped by home. Those people walk from country with the chairs on their heads, and they would stop at the households as they walk. They would stop at the household and they would sell the ware. They would tell you what this bush is for, and they had a bush for everything. Yes, a bush for everything. So my mother used to get these bushes and boil them for whatever complaint we had. We then couldn't run to the doctor. Influenza, you had a Circe bush. You ever heard of Circe bush? Yes. Every vacation, my mother would boil this bush tea. And she'd put a little Mount Gay rum in it, and bottle it off, and put a little Mount Gay rum in it to make it taste, to preserve it, and to make it taste good. And we had to drink that bush tea, She used to put, I remember in the morning, she wouldn't give us tea. This is before the war. She wouldn't give us tea. She would give us cocoa. It has a big jug of cocoa on the table for the kids. And again, she'd put the Epsom salts in the cocoa. So keep your blood pure. And every vacation we had to take castor oil. We had a lineup. Daddy would get the oranges from Nelson Street, from this same lady, Mrs. King was the lady that I told you about, that lived in the three-stair house, Mrs. King. And she had the first V8. V8 was a car. She had a V8 car chauffeur-driven. And yes, Mrs. King's car. And Daddy would buy a basket of oranges from her and bring them home. And you had to line up certain times in your vacation and fill a glass of castor oil and a half of orange, suck that orange, That's how you had to keep your children going, Mother was her own doctor, everything, her own housekeeper, everything, her home dressmaker, everything.
Well, an expert at home economics in more ways than one. Now, at some point in time, we have heard stories of the Canadian cargo steamer of 5,458 tons, which carried a cargo of sugar in bags and molasses in barrels, and was torpedoed by a German submarine. Mrs. Odle remembers that day in Barbados, Sunday, December the 3rd, 1944.
Boy, we were living in Barbados at the time, and it was a vacation time too. It was during the war days, and this ship came in and had a quantity of goods for the stores in British Town. And a submarine came, must be a German submarine. They didn't have a deep water harbour in those days, you see. So the ships were out, and they had the lighters, these big with men roaring these boats to go and take the produce off the big boat, ships, off the ships, and bring into the customs. The customs was in charge of that. So this Cornwallis was struck by, torpedoed by some, came in. But I think they were just making fun of us, So they only put a little hole in the ship. But that day, I remember, we were on vacation, and when this thing went off, it shook the house. It shook the windows and so on, and rattled and so on. And when we went to the front windows looking out, we saw everybody running from Bridgetown, running, coming up Barbados, running to get out of Bridgetown because they couldn't get no buses and so on, running to get out of Bridgetown because there was commotion in Bridgetown with the boat, And the donkey carts and the horse cars, it meant beating the horses that and go a little fast to get out, But that was something. But the back boat, it sunk, but it took quite a while before it sunk. So the customs was able to get the goods from it. They liked them and got some goods from it. Fogarty used to buy a lot of goods from there.
Many books and articles have been written about the events associated with the 1937 riots here in Barbados, and quite a number of them from second-hand information. Norma Odle was 10 years of age at that time. She recalls her experiences.
Those riots were 37, and it came during the holidays. We were home on holiday. Not the elementary schools, they had a shorter holiday, so their schools were still open. So St. Mary's Boys' School was still open when the riots were on. Daddy was in the school in Mason Hall Street, And all of a sudden, lots of people come running to the school from down in Lakes Folly and Chapman Lane and all kind of thing. All those boys went to school to Daddy. And they came to the door, Mr. Clark, give me John, Mr. Clark, give me so-and-so. And I'm having trouble in Bridgetown. Daddy said, trouble what? There's no trouble. But anyway, he found out that there was trouble. So he dismissed his school and everybody went along. But Daddy, like a ship, like a sinking ship, the captain always stayed to the last. Daddy stayed with his school. And my 3 little brothers had to stay with him. So when he did shut down now and lock up everything, to get home, he would have to walk Mason Hall Street, Baxter's Road, and up Eagle Hall. That was the main street. So some of his, some of his parents from Chapman Lane to Mr. Clark, don't go on the front road. We will show you how to get home. So they walked my father and those 3 little boys down Chapman Lane, and all through the back roads, the back alleys, till he found himself, where President Kennedy is right now in the back. And then there was this alleyway, which carried him straight up this alleyway into our back gate. And he got home with these 3 little boys, so he wouldn't be out in the front road, on the main road. Anyway, we got home. My daddy got home now. He said to my mother, close up the house, because in those days, the houses had windows push out on sticks. Yeah, they push out on sticks. Close the house up, and you all get to the back. If they come up this front road, we go through the back gate and run down into the, that's where I just come from, down in the ruins down in there. So one of my brothers now, Eric, Yvette's father, he disobeyed. It was upstairs, he went upstairs, opened the window and got on the roof because he wanted to see what's happening. He could see all down Barbie's Hill, and a crowd came up Barbie's Hill and had 2 young boys with them. And they came up Barbie's Hill. They were only breaking the light. They had lights on the street. There were some stones. And when they got near, we had a light right opposite our house. And when they got near the house, the man said, come on, Amer. And the guy threw the stone to break the light. You know, the stone came over on top of our house where my brother was and almost hit him. He got back in the house fast enough, you know. But that was the experience of the riots. And then, anyhow, they went on. They didn't trouble anybody on the bar because most people live on the front roads. And then you had these different gaps and alleys and so on where underprivileged people live in the chattel houses. And but they didn't trouble any of us. But then at the night now, everything was black, you know, because they were went into the country to break the shops and so on. And there were some very black nights, you know, we would shut up the house early and get to bed and so on.
There is something special about memory. Memory brings life and imagination. Memory allows our rich culture to be passed on from generation to generation. More importantly, our memory is a treasured gift. We thank Norma Odle for her gift of memory, which she has shared so freely. She returns next week. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Take good care of yourself and look out for the interests of your neighbors.